The sports world lost a star Sunday. NASCAR lost a legend. Dale Earnhardt, arguably the greatest driver in his sports history, died during the running of the Daytona 500. Earnhardt, who 3 years ago won this race, was killed during the final lap when his number 3 car crashed nose first into the wall, traveling close to 180 miles per hour. In an ironic twist, Earnhardt the aggressor became Earnhardt the protector. He spent the final laps trying to ensure that Michael Waltrip, who was driving a car owned by Earnhardt, would win, which he did. Earnhardt was already dead before his son Dale Jr. could arrive at the ambulance. Dale Earnhardt was just 2 months shy of his 50th birthday. Welcome to SportsCenter with Stuart Scott. I'm Dan Patrick. Coming up, we'll bring you the day and night in sports, but we begin with the obvious somber note.
Yeah, at the Daytona International Speedway, where the man who's won more races there than any driver in history loses when it counts most. Dale Earnhardt bidding for a second Daytona 500 checkered flag. And what he hoped would start a season to win a record 8 points championship died in a last-lap crash. Scott Van Pelt has more from Daytona.
After a crash in the final lap of the 43rd running of the Daytona 500, which at least on television didn't appear to be life-threatening, Dale Earnhardt was brought here to the Halifax Medical Center, where the news came down at 5:16 Eastern Time that the man who had dominated the Speedway like none other, with 34 victories including the 1998 Daytona 500, had lost his life.
This is undoubtedly one of the toughest announcements that I've ever personally had to make. But after the accident in turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
He arrived to the hospital at 16:54. The full trauma resuscitation was attempted for about a little over 20 minutes, at which time he was placed on a ventilator. Multiple IV lines were given, IV fluids, chest tubes, various diagnostic tests. He never showed any signs of life, and subsequently was by all the physicians in attendance.
NASCAR has lost its greatest driver ever, and I personally have lost a great friend. And that's Bill Francis' quote, and I think that pretty well sums it up for the NASCAR community right now.
Dr. Bohannon indicated that Earnhardt suffered massive head trauma. An autopsy will be performed on Monday to determine the exact cause of death of the 7-time Winston Cup champion. In Daytona Beach, Florida, I'm Scott Van Pelt, ESPN.
Scott, thank you. ESPN's Mike Massaro joins us now. Mike, NASCAR lost 3 drivers last year, and every driver knows this is always a possibility every time you get in a car. But is it somehow different now with Dale?
Absolutely. To draw a comparison to other sports, and I don't think I'm overstating this, Dale Earnhardt was NASCAR's equivalent to, say, Michael Jordan or a Tiger Woods. He was a 7-time champion. He was 6th on the all-time win list with 76 victories, and after so many years behind the wheel of a race car, nobody ever expected this would happen.
The irony is he died on the track where he won 34 races, more than any driver ever won at Daytona. Another irony, for once, Dale wasn't fighting for the win himself. He was actually trying to help out his teammates.
Yep, anybody who knows anything about Dale Earnhardt knows that he's about one thing, and that is about winning. But today, it looked a little bit different on that closing lap. He was running 3rd, and it would appear that he had a chance for victory. But instead, it almost looked like he slowed down and created a 3-wide pack for the 3rd position, while at the same time his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. and his new partner Michael Waltrip diced it up for the victory in the Daytona 500. It almost looked like he knew that those 2 drivers had more to gain by a win in today's Daytona 500 than he did.
Mike, Dale was always his own man. He called the restrictor plates that NASCAR used. He said those were for sissies, and he refused to use the new Hans device. It's a head and neck brace. What is the brace exactly, and is there a chance that if he had worn it, he might have survived this?
Well, it's tough to say, Stuart, whether or not this would have saved his life, but the Hans device is an accessory that attaches to the helmet and to the back of the seat to prevent head and neck movement forward in the case of a violent crash. It seems ironic as well that I spoke with Dale Earnhardt about this very issue just 2 weeks ago at Las Vegas during a test. I asked him whether or not he would experiment with it, and he simply said, no, it's not comfortable. I don't like it. Some of the younger drivers have been able to get used to it, but Dale Earnhardt had been doing this for so long that he did not want to change a thing.
76 career checkered flags for Dale Earnhardt. Mike, we appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
4 years ago, Dale Earnhardt survived a horrific-looking crash at the Daytona 500
As he was being helped into the ambulance, Earnhardt said he realized his car still had tires. So he got out of the ambulance, back into his car, and drove off. On Sunday, Earnhardt was helped back into the ambulance, only this time he didn't get out on his own. Our coverage continues with our RPM Tonight team of Whit Watson and Dr. Jerry Punch.
Doctor, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time. I know how difficult this is because you're very close to the family. But if you could, try to put into words what the loss will mean to the racing world.
Well, I'm not sure you can. I'm having a hard time just finding the words right now because Dale Earnhardt is hard to say was, but one of my best friends for many, many years. You know, it's ironic that people talk about Dale Earnhardt and how selfish he was on the racetrack, how much he cared about himself on the racetrack because he was a winner and he wanted to win when he buckled that helmet on. But those of us who knew him knew that he was really a very, very unselfish individual off the racetrack. And the irony is that today, for the first time that I can remember, and I've known this man a long, long time, you saw him be very, very unselfish in those final few laps. He had a car that could have made a move, in my opinion, following this sport for 20 years. He could have pulled up in front of Sterling Marlin, maybe Kenny Schrader, probably drafted by and won his second Daytona 500. But what he did in those final laps was what a father would do for a son. Ironically, that was his son right in front of him, Dale Earnhardt Jr., or what a brother would do for a brother. And Michael Waltrip was like the little brother that he didn't have. And he stayed there and ran 185 mile per hour screen as a pick, and he kept Sterling Marlin back there and Kenny Schrader and those guys who didn't get a chance to get up there and fight for the win, so that his two people in front of him, his son and one of his best friends, Michael Waltrip, who he had given a chance, did have a chance. And so it was very, very unselfish of Dale Earnhardt. And it's a move that many of us who've known him for years would understand. But it's very difficult now to understand because he's gone.
Now, Doctor, again, we want to stress that we do not have the full details of the injuries to Dale Earnhardt and what precisely caused his death. But in light of the recent stories regarding safety in NASCAR and in all forms of racing, there's been talk about the Hans device, which is now mandatory on ovals in kart, also mandatory in F1 racing. Do we now need to take, yet again, a closer look at issues of safety, protecting the drivers in stock car racing?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, NASCAR racing is the safest form of racing in all of sports, all of motorsports. There's nothing safer than those race cars and inch and three-quarter roll bar tubing. We saw Jeffrey Bodine's horrific tumble at Daytona last year in the truck race. We saw a tumble for Tony Stewart today, an 18-car crash in the Daytona 500. The drivers walked away. Stewart was taken to the hospital and checked out, and basically is going to be okay. What you can't predict is what happened with Dale Earnhardt, what we saw happen with Neil Bonnet a few years ago, what happened with Ernie Irvin at Michigan back in 1994, the abrupt right-hand turn up into the wall and almost head-on collision, that deceleration. In my opinion, I mean, the Hans device is a great device, and it's very difficult to talk about safety devices when we're talking about the loss of someone that we all cared about so much. But I'm not so sure the Hans device or anything at that point in time would, even as safe as these cars are, would have made that much different with that kind of massive deceleration at 185 miles an hour, because typically you get a fracture involving in the head, and those are not survivable injuries. The injuries that are the accidents that look the worst, and people say it didn't look that bad, but the injuries that are the ones that are the survivable are the violent tumbles, because those are the ones where you dissipate enough injury and you may have a broken bone or two and a concussion, but these are the bad ones, the ones where you suddenly stop and veer directly into a wall.
Dr. Jerry Punch, again, I know it's been a very difficult day for you. Thank you very much for your time. A very difficult day for all of us in the racing world. We have lost a great champion, and of course, much more on this later.
Gentlemen, thank you. They called him the Intimidator. They called him Ironhead even before they removed a piece of chisel that stuck in his head while working on a race car back in 1976. No one ever drove harder, without fear. But no one enjoyed a win more than Dale Earnhardt did when he finally won the Daytona 500 in '98 after 19 unsuccessful attempts. And when he started spinning donuts in the infield afterwards, the Intimidator was nothing more than a happy-go-lucky teenager. Mike Gleason has more on the life of the guy who drove the number 3 car.
Is the champion of the Daytona 500.
The Intimidator. I I remember my first year down at IROC in Daytona, and he was standing by one of the trucks, and he's got his glasses on, and he's got his arms crossed, and he's just watching everybody walk by and stuff, and I went up and stood next to him, and oh, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm just looking at everybody.
Dale Earnhardt was born to stock car racing in Kannapolis, North Carolina in 1951. His father, Ralph, was the 1956 NASCAR Sportsman Division champion and a popular man in the Winston Cup garage. Ralph died in 1973 while working on his car. For Dale, racing wasn't a way of life. It was life.
That's all I ever knew. I never did play ball. I never did do anything much in school other than hurried and got home and seen what was going on with the race cars. And it was a unique childhood. And that's why I think the love of racing and my drive to race was so strong when I started is that's what I knew. That's what I grew up doing. And it's just like I knew how to do it. When I sat down in a race car, it was just natural.
As natural as it was very unrefined. When he arrived on the Winston Cup circuit full-time in 1979, he ruffled more than a few feathers and bent his fair share of sheet metal.
Very, very crisp, like a diamond in the rough. It's one of those deals where you see some of them coming and you say, if he makes it, he's going to be okay, but if he keeps driving like this, he ain't going to make it.
I got into Richard at Martinsville. I remember one race that I got into the side of Richard going in one, but I did it from about 10 cars back from where I started, and I passed like 5 or 6 cars getting in the corner to get to Richard Petty. And I didn't do it to get to Richard Petty, but just Richard was in the way when I got there.
He tolerated it. The owners tolerated the wrecks and all that stuff, and some of the drivers tolerated some of the stuff that he did at that time, and it all worked out.
I was listening when they were scolding me. Richard Petty, too, when he was scolding me about driving over the curb into the side of his race car.
He was listening, and he was learning. In 1980, Earnhardt became the first driver to win Rookie of the Year and the Winston Cup Championship in back-to-back seasons. After driving for Rod Osterlund and Bud Moore, Earnhardt signed on with former independent driver Richard Childress. The early going was rough, but a dynasty was in the making.
84 was a little bit of a tough year. 85 was even a tougher year. We blew up a lot of engines. I think we won a race or two both years. But Richard told me, he said, man, this is not really working out. And you're a champion. You know, if you want to go do something else, feel free to. And I said, no, man, we'll stick this thing out. Well, we had 85 was a tough year. We turned the corner in 86, won a championship. And then we just went from there up. It just was amazing.
From 1986 to 1994, Earnhardt and Childress won 6 championships in 48 races. They had the best pit crew. They won on short tracks. They won on speedways. And Earnhardt's ability to master the draft became legend. The result was a fan frenzy and marketing machine that the sport has never seen. He copyrighted his name and signature and turned souvenir sales into a standalone booming business. His career was like an all-comers meet, beating the likes of Yarborough and Petty, to Wallace and Elliott. Fans either loved him or hated him. There was no middle ground.
Dale Earnhardt came along when Richard Petty was going out. We needed greatly a new superstar and became a different kind of a hero than Richard Petty was. Became the Intimidator, the Man in Black, and sold a lot of tickets for us and got a lot of TV ratings up there.
But the Intimidator's Achilles heel was Daytona. He had won there more than any driver in history, but never in the Daytona 500. In 1998, on the 20th try, the sport's biggest star finally took the sport's biggest prize.
Been here a lot. This is the greatest time I've ever had in Victor Lane right here. This is it.
The Earnhardt name has gone from the dirt tracks of North Carolina to the title of a multi-million-dollar racing corporation.
Win the championships and race against Petty and people that he raced against, and Yarborough and Pearson and these guys. Pretty unique, pretty awesome thing. All I can remember or think about is that he would have enjoyed this so much as what we've accomplished and what we've done, and enjoyed things I've done over time. And I'd like for him to have been along the whole ride. It would have been neat.
Dale Earnhardt won 7 career Winston Cup titles, tying him with Richard Petty for most all-time. His 76 career wins ranked 6th all-time, as he won at least one race in 20 of 22 full-time seasons. The 1979 Rookie of the Year led over 25,000 laps in his career.
As for the race itself, 195,000 in attendance for the 43rd running, 174th lap. Ward Burton gets loose off the turn, hits Tony Stewart. Stewart hits the wall and then flips a couple of times, causing a chain reaction. 19 cars involved in the crash, including 8 of last year's top 10 points leaders. Miraculously, nobody was seriously hurt. Look at it again, and you will see Tony Stewart will roll, get airborne, and then hits his teammate Bobby Labonte, last year's Winston Cup points champion. Labonte's car would go up in flames. Watch and listen to Mark Martin's view of this crash.
The outside wall real hard. Gets hit again, and takes out.
Seems like it takes minutes, but it's only a couple of seconds. Labonte escapes from his flaming car. Steve Parks showing his displeasure. Tony Stewart was okay, but did suffer a concussion, and the red flag came out. 13 laps to go. Michael Waltrip driving in a car owned by Dale Earnhardt Sr., followed by Dale Earnhardt Jr. Michael Waltrip's wife, Buffy, praying, finding it hard to watch. Waltrip in the lead, and you will look in the distance. Earnhardt Sr.'s crash, as Waltrip will win the Daytona 500 as they head down the final stretch. Darrell Waltrip, Michael's older brother and a Daytona 500 winner himself, enjoying the win. Buffy will celebrate on board with an excited Michael Waltrip. What a long, long trip it's been. First Winston Cup win in 463 starts. Waltrip driving the car owned by Earnhardt ended a 15-year victory drought by edging Jr. There were a total of 49 lead changes, or 40 more than last year's race. Waltrip, who led 27 laps Sunday, had led only 11 laps in 14 previous Daytona 500s. Dale Earnhardt finished 12th. Waltrip becomes the 6th driver and first since Sterling Marlin back in '94 to make the Daytona 500 his first career Winston Cup victory. For Waltrip, it's his 6th top 10 in 15 career Daytona 500 starts. Still to come on the program, the nation's top-ranked team was coming off an 8-day layoff when it visited Clemson. Would the Heels look rusty?
And Jason Kidd, what's the question? There is no question, only an answer.
And we will rekindle memories of last year's NBA Finals as the Lakers and Pacers square off in a game that goes down to the final shot.